The sky over Earth cracked open like a dropped mirror, and from its shimmering wound spilled 10,000 mercenaries in silver armor, chanting their battle hymn about glorious conquest and fair dental plans. But down on the frozen coast of Alaska, while humanity panicked and governments scrambled and satellites wept, a single honey badger casually chewed through the leg of an incoming scouting drone, swallowed a piece of it, and burped sparks. The drone exploded. Half the coastline shook. The honey badger blinked once, unimpressed by the apocalypse. And somewhere in the chaos, a military AI declared that humanity's last hope was a man currently attempting to unscrew his fishing line from his bootlace. That was the moment Earth realized it was going to war with the Galactic Empire, armed only with Arctic Hunter and an indestructible, emotionally complicated honey badger. Arctic Hunter had no idea that the world had chosen him. He was far too busy cursing at a knot so tangled it appeared to possess sentience. His parka hood was pulled tight against the wind, his beard frosted with ice, his patience already exhausted long before aliens decided to invade. He did not notice the stealth shuttle descending behind him until a shadow fell over the ice. The hum of its engines vibrated across the shoreline, scattering snow and spirals. Arctic squinted up at it in annoyance, muttering something about tourists. The shuttle door hissed open and General Sonia Red stepped out, her uniform crisp despite the wind howling at her like an angry polar bear. She looked like a woman who had not slept since childhood and did not intend to start now. Behind her, two robotic escorts marched forward, their metal boots sinking slightly into the ice. Arctic made no effort to stand or salute. He simply yanked one final time and freed his fishing line with the triumphant fury of a man winning a minor but meaningful battle. General Red approached him with the expression of someone about to ruin his entire afternoon. She informed him, in a tone so serious it froze the wind itself, that the Galactic Empire had launched a full-scale invasion. Arctic nodded politely and asked if this meant the fish would stop biting. General Red's eyelid twitched. She handed him a holographic briefing. The projection showed 10,000 mercenaries descending upon Earth, each wearing shimmering armor and carrying weapons capable of slicing mountains into decorative shapes. Their fleet blotted out the upper atmosphere. Their commander, a towering blue-skinned alien with glowing red eyes and cheekbones sharp enough to open mail, declared that Earth would submit or be obliterated. Arctic watched the recording while slowly reeling in his fishing line, pausing only to mutter that the alien commander needed moisturizer. General Red revealed the truly terrifying part next. The global military budget had been catastrophically overspent on planetary morale programs, mostly involving fireworks festivals and inspirational amusement parks. As a result, Earth possessed exactly 2 operatives who were technically free to deploy. Arctic assumed one of them was someone else. General Red shook her head. The other one approached with the swagger of a creature that feared absolutely nothing. Bertha the honey badger stomped out of the shuttle like a small, fur-coated tank with anger management issues. Her metal claws clicked on the ice. Her reinforced fur gleamed faintly, absorbing the cold and radiating back heat like a living furnace. One of her eyes glowed purple from an experimental upgrade. She stared at Arctic as though evaluating whether she should adopt him as a partner or a snack. Arctic sighed. He knew this honey badger. The last time he had worked with her, she had dismantled a research facility because its vending machine refused to dispense her peanuts. She had also bitten a general. Several. Possibly 8. It was difficult to count when most of them refused to file official reports. General Red explained that Bertha had been further enhanced since then. The honey badger demonstrated this by leaping into the air, spinning once, and landing on a small surveillance drone that had been attempting to approach undetected. The drone imploded like a crushed soda can. Bertha snorted proudly. Arctic asked if Earth was truly relying on him and a honey badger to stop an army of 10,000. General Red confirmed it. He stared at her, opened his mouth to argue, and then closed it again. He had the sinking feeling that if he refused, the honey badger would physically drag him into battle anyway. As they boarded the shuttle, ORLA-9, the sentient orbital AI, appeared as a flickering blue face across the interior screens. It spoke with the dramatic flair of an actor who believed every moment was the climax of a 30-season show. ORLA-9 informed them that the mercenaries were not invading just for conquest. They were searching for something hidden on Earth. Something ancient. Something that should never have been awakened. Arctic frowned. He had the distinct sensation that today was going to get worse at a rate that would soon become mathematically impossible. Bertha sat beside him, claws tapping impatiently, tail twitching with anticipation. She seemed thrilled. Arctic suspected she had been waiting her whole life for an opportunity to express her chaos on an intergalactic scale. The shuttle lifted into the air, slicing through the storm clouds. From the window, Arctic saw streaks of light in the sky, mercenary dropships descending in coordinated formation. Explosions burst across distant coastlines. Cities scrambled to evacuate. Humanity braced for annihilation. And yet, as the shuttle climbed higher, ORLA-9's voice grew grave. It explained that the Galactic Empire had misread ancient star maps. They believed Earth housed a weapon capable of destroying their enemies. ORLA-9 paused as though struggling to decide how much to reveal. Finally, it admitted the truth. Earth did contain something dangerous. Something powerful. Something alive. Arctic felt his stomach drop. Bertha growled, low and eager. General Red stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The wind outside roared as if warning them to turn back while they still could. But it was far too late. Humanity had already placed its last hope in a man who wanted to fish and a honey badger who wanted to fight everything that had ever existed. And whatever was hidden on Earth had just awakened. The Galactic Empire flagship loomed above Earth like a floating mountain plated in silver and arrogance. Its surface was a maze of glowing lines, defensive cannons, and decorative fins that served no practical purpose except to scream, "We are rich and dangerous." Arctic Hunter, who had never ridden in anything more advanced than a fishing boat with a motor that begged for retirement, was now strapped into a stealth shuttle on a collision course with the Empire's biggest and most heavily armed vessel. The shuttle shuddered as it approached the hangar bay, disguised under a maintenance code hacked together by ORLA-9 during a moment of what it confidently described as artistic brilliance. Arctic suspected artistic brilliance was AI terminology for guesswork. As their shuttle slipped into the hangar without immediate destruction, Arctic tried to look confident despite gripping his seat with a force that suggested he wanted to leave fingerprints on metal. Bertha the honey badger stood beside him on her hind legs, wearing an expression of excitement unmatched by any rational creature. Her tail twitched like a countdown timer. She smelled mayhem coming. The hangar bay was enormous, filled with mercenary squads marching in flawless formation. Their armor gleamed under bright lights, and their weapons hummed with lethal elegance. Arctic stepped out, trying to mimic the slow, bored walk of a maintenance worker. He wore a borrowed jumpsuit labeled Pest Control Division, which he hoped would explain both his presence and the honey badger. Bertha strutted ahead, projecting the confidence of someone who believed she could defeat the entire ship before breakfast. The mercenaries barely glanced at them. That was both reassuring and deeply insulting. Arctic kept his head down, walking past troopers who looked bred for intimidation. Some had 4 arms. Some had glowing veins. One had a helmet shaped like a shark's skull. Bertha glared at that one until even the shark helmet looked away. Arctic located a maintenance panel ORLA-9 had highlighted. He crouched beside it, pretending to scan for pests while actually planting a small listening device. Bertha, on the other hand, refused to pretend anything. She stalked toward a group of spherical cleaning bots humming peacefully as they mopped the floor. The bots detected her. They scanned her. They identified her as a non-authorized biological contaminant. The bots deployed brushes. Bertha deployed violence. In less than 6 seconds, all 5 bots lay scattered across the floor in pieces, their parts arranged in what looked suspiciously like a victory sculpture. Arctic pinched the bridge of his nose. A mercenary officer walked by, saw the wreckage, muttered something about incompetent maintenance bots, and continued on without questioning anything. ORLA-9 pinged Arctic through his earpiece, informing him that the ship was preparing for its first wave attack. Commander Vrax, leader of the Empire's 10,000 mercenaries, had just initiated a briefing in the command center. If Arctic and Bertha could infiltrate it, they might learn the reason the Empire believed Earth hid an ancient superweapon. Arctic considered his options. The entire ship was crawling with warriors, drones, security fields, and bureaucracy. Mostly bureaucracy. He took a deep breath and signaled Bertha to follow. They reached an elevator guarded by two enormous mercenaries who appeared to have been sculpted from rock and bad intentions. Arctic handed one of them a forged maintenance report. The guard frowned, scanning it. He asked why a pest control specialist needed access to the command level. Arctic opened his mouth to improvise a lie. Bertha solved the problem by ramming the guard in the shin. The mercenary howled and crumpled to the floor. Bertha hissed at him in triumph. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Arctic shoved the first guard into him, knocking them both over. Bertha leaped onto the control panel, pressing buttons with joyful chaos until the elevator doors slid open. Arctic dragged the guards inside, propped them against the wall, and pressed the highest floor. The elevator music was soft and soothing, an odd contrast to the unconscious bodies and the honey badger attempting to chew on an emergency fire extinguisher. Arctic gently pulled the extinguisher away before she detonated something. The doors opened to reveal the command bridge, a wide chamber filled with holographic screens, tactical displays, and far too much self-importance. Commander Vrax stood at the center, towering over his officers. His cape billowed even though there was no wind. His armor gleamed like a polished statue. He radiated authority and irritation in equal measure. Vrax lectured his troops about the invasion timeline, which was behind schedule by precisely 7%. He emphasized efficiency, discipline, and the tragic disappointment he felt every time someone misfiled a planetary bombardment request form. Arctic blinked in disbelief as Vrax opened a battle strategy presentation containing hundreds of slides. Each slide had bullet points, graphs, and at least one motivational quote attributed to ancient conquerors. Arctic and Bertha hid behind a storage console, listening. Vrax explained that Earth was not merely a conquest target. According to the Empire's translations, ancient star tablets indicated Earth once served as the Vault of Polaris, a superweapon capable of annihilating entire armadas. The Empire needed to seize it before their enemies did. Arctic felt a chill run through him despite being nowhere near actual ice. Bertha growled quietly, her instincts sensing the danger beneath the words. Suddenly an officer detected unauthorized signals within the bridge. Vrax ordered a sweep. Arctic cursed silently, shoving Bertha toward a maintenance hatch. Bertha resisted, wanting to charge the officers instead. Arctic bribed her with a packet of emergency rations. That worked. They dropped into the lower ducts just as mercenaries swarmed the area. The ducts were cramped and smelled like heated metal and poorly ventilated ambition. Arctic crawled through while Bertha bulldozed forward, denting every surface. As they descended, ORLA-9 transmitted new intel. Deep within the ship was a secure archive containing the original translated tablets. If they could steal them, Earth might learn the truth behind Polaris. They reached the archive level by sliding down a slanted duct and bursting through a ventilation grate. Bertha landed with a war cry. Arctic landed with an accidental grunt. The archive room was quiet, dimly lit, and lined with crystalline data pillars. Arctic approached the central table and activated its display. A hologram flickered to life, showing star charts and ancient symbols. As he zoomed in on the translation, his breath caught. The weapon Polaris was not described as a machine. It was described as a presence. A consciousness. Something that chose its host. At that moment the alarms blared. The room sealed. Mercenaries rushed toward them from both sides. ORLA-9 guided their stolen shuttle back toward Earth with the tone of an AI that deeply wished it had been assigned to a calmer planet. Arctic Hunter stared out the window, watching the curve of the world grow larger. He clutched the crystal they had stolen from the Empire archives, replaying its holographic symbols in his mind. Bertha the honey badger paced restlessly across the cramped floor, claws scraping as she tested the shuttle walls for structural weaknesses she might exploit for fun. The engines rumbled beneath them, a reminder that they were flying directly into a global invasion with nothing but stolen intel and the unpredictable fury of a small beast who treated violence as a recreational hobby. When they entered the upper atmosphere, comm channels erupted with distress signals. Cities scrambled defenses. Fighters swarmed around enemy dropships like angry insects around a bonfire. Arctic exhaled slowly. This was no longer reconnaissance. This was war, and they were returning with answers nobody wanted. ORLA-9 informed them that the invasion had accelerated. Multiple mercenary factions, once united, were now converging independently toward one region: Antarctica. The world had always treated the icy continent as a lonely wilderness of ice and penguins, but now alien warships descended toward it as if drawn by a magnet. Arctic braced himself as the shuttle broke through storm clouds, visibility fading into a swirling white wall. ORLA-9 revealed the coordinates the Empire believed led to Polaris. The more Arctic examined the star map and translation, the more he felt a strange tension in his stomach. Something was beneath the ice. Something that had been buried long before humanity learned how to write down stories, long before nations claimed territories, long before the modern world existed. A presence waiting in frozen sleep. The shuttle landed roughly on a flat expanse of blinding snow. Wind howled across the ice, sharp as knives. Arctic stepped out, his boots sinking into the powder. The cold clawed at his face, though he had spent much of his life in freezing conditions. This cold felt older, heavier, as if the land itself held memories of something colossal. Bertha hopped onto the snow, shaking off frost and immediately charging at a gust of wind as though it had insulted her honor. ORLA-9 projected a holographic beacon showing the closest entrance point. It stood several kilometers away, a deep fissure in the ice that did not appear on any scientific survey. The Empire had not discovered it yet, but their converging forces meant they soon would. Arctic tightened his parka and began the trudge forward. The wind lashed them, the air stung like needles, and every step felt as though the ice resented their presence. Bertha plowed ahead with relentless determination, snarling at the storm as if daring it to challenge her dominance. Halfway to the fissure, Arctic spotted movement in the sky. Small at first, then rapidly multiplying. Dropships. Dozens of them. Their engines shrieked like predators descending onto prey. Arctic signaled Bertha to hide, though it was like signaling a thunderstorm to be quiet. She reluctantly burrowed herself into a snow mound, her eyes glowing faintly beneath the frost. The ships landed in formation, dispersing mercenary squads who spread out across the ice with scanner equipment and weapons drawn. They moved with urgency and tension, as though aware that they were not merely hunting Earth but racing against one another. Arctic and Bertha slipped between ice ridges, keeping low until they reached the edge of the fissure. The ground curved downward into a cavern that exhaled air far warmer than the world above. The walls glowed faintly with embedded crystals. It felt wrong. The warmth was not natural. It pulsed slowly, like breath. Arctic exchanged a glance with Bertha. Even the honey badger seemed momentarily unsettled by the sensation of entering something that felt alive. They descended carefully, gripping the uneven walls. Frost melted into a thin mist that rose from the depths. The cavern floor opened into a massive underground chamber, filled with structures made of smooth silver stone. They were not carved. They were grown. Arctic stepped quietly, boots crunching on ancient frost. Bertha padded behind him, unusually alert. ORLA-9 whispered through the transmitter that the architecture matched no known alien species. Whatever had built this came from an era older than the Empire, older than the great galactic migrations, older perhaps than recorded time. At the center of the chamber stood a circular platform covered in markings identical to those on the stolen crystal. Arctic knelt beside it. When he ran his glove along the symbols, the floor vibrated softly. It responded to touch. Not electricity. Not kinetic energy. Something deeper. Something conscious. Before he could investigate further, the cavern trembled with distant explosions. Mercenaries had found one of the access tunnels. Their echoing shouts bounced off the walls, distorted by the acoustics into something inhuman. Arctic gripped the crystal, trying to activate the console more deliberately this time. As he pressed the symbol sequences in the order shown on the hologram, the platform shifted. The ice around it cracked. Light burst from beneath the floor, illuminating the chamber with a radiance that felt warm and cold at once. A pillar rose from the center. Not metal. Not stone. A smooth, translucent material that seemed to hold the night sky within it. Stars glimmered inside, swirling gently like trapped galaxies. Bertha stepped closer, sniffing cautiously. The pillar pulsed as though acknowledging her presence. Arctic felt a vibration in his bones, a hum that resonated through the air. A voice echoed suddenly, not through his ears but through his mind. It was gentle and vast, like a whisper carried across 1,000 years. It spoke not in words but in impressions. Awakening. Return. Danger. Hunter. Host. Arctic staggered, gripping his head. Bertha bristled, stepping protectively in front of him. The pillar pulse intensified, then softened, as though recognizing an old companion. Arctic felt a presence reaching toward him, warm yet invasive, curious yet cautious. The stolen crystal glowed brighter, responding to the pillar, as though completing a long broken circuit. The voice sent a final impression into his mind. Not an explanation. A warning. Polaris was not a weapon made by ancient hands. Polaris was a living being sealed away because the galaxy had feared what it could become. As the realization struck him, mercenaries stormed into the chamber from 3 different tunnels, weapons raised, shouting commands. Their scanners reacted wildly to the pillar, emitting alarms. They spread out to encircle Arctic and Bertha. The leaders shouted claims over who would capture the superweapon first, each faction desperate for the glory. Then the ground shook violently. The pillar responded to the threat with a ripple of light that washed across the room. The cavern resonated like a massive bell. Arctic shielded his eyes. Bertha roared in challenge. The mercenaries had expected a dormant relic. They had found something else entirely. Polaris was waking. The cavern pulsed like a giant heartbeat, sending waves of shimmering light across the walls as Polaris awakened fully. The mercenaries froze in mid-charge, their armor flickering with interference from the energy flooding the chamber. Arctic instinctively stepped back, one arm shielding his face, the other keeping Bertha from leaping straight into the transcendent glow. The honey badger growled anyway, unwilling to be impressed by anything that glowed, vibrated, or existed without her permission. The pillar of starlight shivered and then dissolved into a swirling form that rose above the platform, expanding into a tall, luminous figure. It had no defined features at first, only a shape like a human sculpted from nebulae, galaxies drifting within its outline. Gradually details formed, soft and ethereal, like a being halfway between dream and reality. When it turned its head, its face held no eyes, yet Arctic felt it was seeing him as clearly as sunlight sees a mountain. The voice that followed did not echo through the cave. It slid directly into their minds. You opened the door after so long. Arctic gripped the crystal so hard his knuckles ached. His breath came out in cold clouds. He had fought bears, blizzards, rogue lab experiments, and Bertha in a bad mood, but nothing compared to standing before a cosmic entity that treated consciousness as language. Bertha took 3 aggressive steps toward Polaris, fur bristling like a tiny comet ready for battle. The being of starlight tilted its head as though examining a curious but dangerous creature. She is fierce, Polaris said calmly, as though commenting on weather. Good. The world will need that. Arctic found his voice, though it cracked awkwardly. What are you? Why are you here? Why is the Empire looking for you? Polaris drifted closer, light radiating from its body in soft waves. It did not walk. It simply shifted through space, stepping without touching the ground. Its presence was gentle but immense, like a friendly star that had forgotten how not to shine. I am not a weapon, Polaris answered. I was never built to destroy. I was born to protect. When the ancient worlds fell, they asked me to guard against what comes from the dark between galaxies. Arctic felt a chill unrelated to the ice. The mercenaries tightened their formation but hesitated, clearly unsure if shooting an ancient cosmic being was tactically advisable. One faction leader, a broad alien with tusks extending from his jaw, shouted that Polaris belonged to them by right of conquest. Another faction leader shouted back that his clan reached the chamber first. A third declared that the pillar belonged to the Empire alone. Polaris ignored all of them. Arctic tried to make sense of the telepathic impressions Polaris sent. They showed collapsing star systems, giant shadows tearing through light, civilizations fleeing like scattered sparks. The impressions were blurry and overwhelming, but the message was unmistakable. Something unimaginably destructive had chased Polaris across the galaxy long ago. Something ancient and hungry. When Polaris spoke again, its voice darkened. The Empire misunderstands the old records. They believe controlling me grants victory. But I cannot be controlled. I can only choose. And what I choose may save you all or doom us together. Before Arctic could ask what that meant, the mercenaries snapped into motion. One fired a containment net that expanded into glowing restraints meant to trap energy beings. Another squad launched stun beams, hoping to weaken Polaris before rival factions could act. Beams crackled and burst against the starlit aura, scattering harmlessly like rain against a mountain. Polaris did not flinch. It did not retaliate. It simply watched the chaos with an expression that somehow conveyed sorrow, as though it had lived through this mistake too many times across too many civilizations. Bertha, however, did retaliate. She launched herself into the nearest mercenary squad with a guttural war cry that echoed like a furious snowstorm. Armor plates crumpled under her claws. A towering alien screamed as she latched onto his shoulder and used him as a platform to leap at the next. Arctic drew a stolen mercenary blaster and fired warning shots to scatter the troops, knowing full well warning shots were optimistic when Bertha was involved. Polaris raised a hand, and a ripple of soft light expanded outward. The entire cavern vibrated, and every weapon slipped from mercenary hands as though gravity had briefly become confused. Even Bertha paused mid-strike, surprised when the enemy she was clinging to collapsed in a peaceful heap. Polaris approached Arctic slowly, the ground glowing beneath each shimmering, floating step. "You came with the key," it said. The crystal brightened in his hand, projecting star maps that spiraled above them. "I have slept, but your world called to me again. Something wakes in the dark. And I sense you are tied to it more than you know." Arctic blinked in confusion. "I am a fisherman. I fish. I am not tied to cosmic horrors." Polaris observed him for a moment longer, and he felt warmth pass through him like sunlight on snow. "That is what makes you suitable." He wanted to argue that very strongly, but explosions cut him short. One of the remaining mercenary factions had brought a portable plasma cannon. They fired it directly at Polaris. The blast tore across the chamber with a deafening roar, scattering ice and stone. Polaris shielded Arctic without moving, the beam bending around its form like light curving around a black hole. The cannon overheated and ruptured, sending mercenaries flying backward. Commander Vrax burst into the chamber with elite soldiers, frustration radiating from his every step. He surveyed the chaos, the unconscious mercenaries, the glowing being, and the honey badger perched victoriously atop a fallen trooper. His eye twitched. He shouted for all factions to cease fire, and ordered them to fall back. For once, they listened. Vrax faced Polaris, clearly terrified but refusing to show it. He demanded Polaris surrender peacefully to the Empire. Polaris regarded him like someone watching a small child threaten to lift a mountain. "I do not belong to empires," it said. "I belong only to the purpose for which I awakened. The darkness comes, Commander. Your armies cannot stop it. Your chains cannot bind me. But you may yet survive it." Vrax hesitated. Arctic noticed the flicker of fear in his eyes, the kind that comes from realizing the universe is far larger and more terrifying than any military chart had prepared him for. Polaris drifted nearer, placing a hand of light on the ancient platform. The cavern hummed again, deeper this time. Arctic felt a tug in his mind, not painful but heavy with meaning. Polaris communicated one final message. "The one you fear does not seek me. It seeks what I fled long ago. And soon, It will find us. A tremor rippled through the air as though something had brushed the planet from far away, something vast and hungry. The ceiling cracked. Dust rained down. Even Bertha looked up warily. Polaris dimmed slightly, preparing for something Arctic did not yet understand. The darkness between galaxies is moving again, Polaris said. And it has found your world. The warning had barely left Polaris before the entire cavern shook as though a giant had seized the planet and given it a violent shake. Arctic Hunter stumbled, barely keeping his balance as cracks ripped through the ancient floor. Dust burst from the walls in pale clouds. Ice shattered and fell in deadly shards. Bertha sprang onto a boulder, her fur puffed and charged with static as she hissed at the ceiling like she intended to fight the entire sky. Commander Vrax barked orders to his mercenaries, but even the most disciplined among them struggled to maintain formation when the ground itself was rebelling. A deafening roar rolled across the air, not from the cavern but from the sky above, a sound that bypassed ears and vibrated deep in every bone. Arctic felt a pressure behind his eyes, a primal instinct screaming that something beyond understanding had arrived. ORLA-9 spoke urgently through the calm, its usual theatrical tones stripped away, leaving only raw alarm. It announced that a spatial rift had opened near Earth's upper orbit, and something massive was emerging, something that did not match any known galactic vessel, species, or physics model. Arctic did not need scientific terminology. He felt the dread bleeding from Polaris like heat from a dying star. The cavern ceiling finally gave way in a thunderous collapse. Light from the surface stabbed down in jagged rays as a hole tore open, revealing a swirling sky where clouds were being sucked into a spiraling void. The mercenaries panicked, some sprinting toward exits that no longer existed, others shouting about doomsday protocols. Vrax yelled at his troops to stand firm, but even he could not hide the terror creasing his expression. Then the shadow appeared. It spilled across the sky like ink poured over a painting, its edges shifting, tendrils stretching, warping the air around it. The thing was colossal, so vast it blotted out the horizon. Its surface rippled like liquid darkness, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. It had no defined shape, yet hints of limbs and eyes appeared and vanished like nightmares half remembered. The very sight of it twisted the senses, making the world feel suddenly smaller, fragile as thin ice. ORLA-9 identified it with a voice trembling in digital fear. Null Titan detected. Origin unknown. Power level off measurable scale. Probability of planetary destruction high. Arctic stared upward, his breath frozen in his chest. The creature did not simply arrive. It reached. One immense limb extended toward Earth, claws unraveling reality in jagged patterns of violet lightning. The sky wailed. Polaris dimmed in response, its light flickering like a candle struggling against hurricane winds. The cosmic entity spoke without words, its voice a rush of ancient memories and terror. It comes for me. It has hunted for ages. I fled once. I cannot flee again. Arctic looked at Polaris, watching the fear ripple through its starlit form. The Null Titan bent lower, tendrils piercing the upper atmosphere, causing waves of gravitational distortion that toppled mercenary ships like toys. A squadron of Empire fighters fired everything they had, but their weapons evaporated on contact, erased as though they had never existed. The Titan did not even acknowledge the attack. It was focused solely on the cavern. Bertha launched herself onto Polaris' platform, growling at the sky. The glow from her cybernetic eye pulsed rapidly. Arctic felt something inside him coil, a mixture of terror, determination, and an instinct he had never needed before. For once he did not think of fish, cold gear, or the quiet life he preferred. He thought only of Earth, people, and the honey badger who looked ready to fight a cosmic nightmare despite being the size of a house cat. Polaris turned to Arctic, light flowing like liquid across its form. I cannot hold against it alone. I need a conduit. One who can stabilize my power without being consumed. One grounded in instinct, survival, resistance. One who stands before darkness without ambition. One who does not seek to command the cosmos. Arctic stepped back, shaking his head because he understood what was coming. No. Absolutely not. Am not conduit material. I am fishing material. Polaris hovered closer. You have returned again and again where others would fall. Not through strength. Through will. Bertha leaped onto Arctic's chest and bit his collar as if supporting Polaris' argument. He pushed her off gently, heart racing. The Titan roared again, tearing a chunk of atmosphere into swirling energy. Time was running out. Commander Vrax stared between Arctic and Polaris, realization dawning like a nightmare he could not escape. Do it, he muttered. If that thing destroys Earth, the Empire is finished too. Arctic exhaled shakily, accepting that he had been outvoted by a cosmic being, a honey badger, and a mercenary commander who looked like he desperately needed therapy. He stepped onto the platform. Polaris lowered its hand of shimmering starlight and pressed it against his chest. Light exploded. Arctic felt his body stretch, expand, and compress all at once. His vision filled with galaxies spiraling, collapsing, reforming. His veins burned with the fire of distant stars, yet his breath remained steady. The cavern vanished, replaced by a plain of infinite night and swirling nebulas. Polaris whispered through him, using his thoughts as a vessel. We are joined. Not one controlling the other. Two voices. One path. Arctic returned to the cavern in a burst of radiance that shook the earth. His eyes shimmered with starfire. His muscles thrummed with cosmic resonance. Bertha sniffed him cautiously, then nodded in approval. Vrax stared like he was witnessing the birth of a legend he had absolutely not prepared for. The Null Titan sensed the fusion and screamed, its massive form twisting, stretching toward them with renewed fury. Polaris spoke through Arctic voice in a layered harmony. Together. Bertha charged first, because she always charged first. She leaped toward a descending Titan tendril, slashing with claws infused by the radiation pouring from Arctic. To the shock of everyone present, her strike actually damaged the Titan, ripping away a chunk of shadow that evaporated into stardust. The Titan recoiled violently. Arctic raised his hand, sending a beam of concentrated stellar energy toward another tendril, carving through it with blinding light. Vrax rallied his mercenaries, ordering every ship, drone, and weapon to fire in coordinated volleys. For the first time, their attacks did not simply vanish. They helped destabilize the Titan just enough for Arctic and Bertha to deliver real damage. The Titan roared, collapsing the sky into darkness as it unleashed a counterattack. Waves of entropy rippled outward, erasing everything they touched. Arctic shielded the mercenaries with a dome of shimmering energy while Bertha barreled through the collapsing ground, ripping into another limb with ferocious determination. Her growl echoed like a war drum. Arctic felt the Titan probing his mind, seeking Polaris, seeking the power hidden within him. But Polaris anchored him, guiding his thoughts, stabilizing the energy before it could consume him. You see now, it whispered. They chase not me. They chase what I carry. The beginning. The spark. The light they wish to extinguish forever. Arctic gritted his teeth and pushed back, channeling every ounce of strength, every survival instinct forged through years in the wilderness. For once, the universe did not feel impossibly vast. It felt like a challenge he refused to lose. The Null Titan reeled backward, its massive form collapsing into a writhing storm of shadow and cosmic static. The shockwave of its stumble rippled across the ice plains, sending fissures racing in every direction like angry lightning trapped beneath frozen ground. Arctic Hunter felt the force of the Titan's retreat vibrating through the cosmic energy inside him. His vision flickered between the physical world and some deeper layer of existence, where the Titan's true form stretched endlessly like a nightmare too large to fit inside any one reality. Polaris' steady presence anchored him, keeping his mind from fracturing under the pressure of channeling power not meant for human bones. Bertha wasn't thinking about cosmic layers or existential threats. She charged again, sprinting across the collapsing ice with reckless determination. Her claws, supercharged by the energy bleeding from Arctic, tore chunks of darkness off the Titan's lower limbs. The Titan roared, an ear-shattering sound that warped the air into trembling waves. The mercenary armies braced themselves, some dropping to their knees, others covering their ears as though that could possibly help against a sound older than stars. Commander Vrax gave a battle cry that cracked somewhere between courage and pure terror. He ordered all mercenary forces to form a unified line and fire on his command. Hundreds of alien soldiers, spread across multiple factions that had spent years trying to destroy each other, now pivoted shoulder to shoulder, aiming plasma rifles, energy cannons, and anti-armor missiles at the same impossible enemy. For the first time since the invasion began, they were fighting not for conquest, not for pride, but for survival. Arctic raised his arm, and Polaris guided the flow of power through him. A beam of starlight erupted from his hand, shooting into the sky and slamming into the Titan core. The impact carved a burning wound into its swirling form. The Titan shrieked again, its tendrils thrashing wildly, smashing into the ice and sending chunks of frozen earth hurling into the sky like meteorites. One tendril crashed down near the mercenary line, throwing soldiers into the air. Vrax rushed forward, pulling a fallen trooper to safety before ordering a retreat to safer ground. Arctic stepped forward, every movement filled with weight not entirely his own. The ground cracked beneath him, glowing faintly where his boots touched. Polaris whispered in his mind, not with fear but with urgency. It weakens. But not enough. It will not flee. It will consume this world to reach me. It will not stop. Arctic felt his pulse thunder in his ears. The Titan loomed over them, a living eclipse blotting out the sun. Its tendrils coiled like serpents preparing to strike. Bertha bared her teeth, standing between Arctic and the encroaching darkness, as though she alone intended to take on the cosmic monster. She looked absurdly small, a lone honey badger challenging a nightmare. The Titan struck first. A tendril the size of a skyscraper whipped downward toward Arctic. He braced for contact, raising both arms instinctively. Starlight erupted around him, forming a dome of shimmering energy that caught the blow. The impact was devastating. The dome cracked, Arctic lungs heaved, and he felt Polaris surge inside him to reinforce the barrier just before it shattered. The force sent him skidding backward across the ice, knocking him onto one knee. Bertha launched herself at the point where the tendril had hit, ripping into the darkness with wild, blistering ferocity. The Titan recoiled with a sound like tearing planets. Arctic pushed himself to his feet. His entire body hummed with unstable energy. His bones glowed faintly through his skin. He knew he could not contain Polaris forever. The power was too vast, too intense, too ancient. But he only needed to hold it long enough. He shouted to Vrax to direct all troops to focus fire on the Titan's lower mass. Vrax barked orders, his voice carrying above the chaos. Mercenaries unleashed a barrage of coordinated attacks, bright explosions flashing across the Titan's form. The air filled with the smell of ozone and burnt atmosphere. Arctic breathed deeply, centering himself. Polaris guided him, helping him channel the swirling cosmic power without letting it tear him apart. Together they formed a single pulse of radiant energy. Arctic leapt into the air, propelled by a blast of starlight that sent a crater rippling across the ice beneath him. He shot upward toward the Titan core, a blazing streak of luminescent energy. The Titan reacted instantly, drawing back its massive form to swallow him whole. The sky warped around its mouth, reality thinning like fabric stretched too tight. Arctic pushed onward, shouting through clenched teeth. Polaris amplified his voice inside his mind. For the light that remains. He thrust his hand directly into the Titan core. The explosion of light was blinding. The Titan convulsed violently, its entire form rippling apart. Its tendrils snapped like broken whips, flinging chunks of shadow across the sky. The core split open, light pouring from it like a collapsing star. Bertha, still latched onto a lower limb, was thrown violently into the air. Arctic saw her spinning helplessly and reached toward her, but the burst of power knocked him back. The honey badger crashed through the chaos, disappearing behind a ridge of shattered ice. Arctic heart seized with panic. He tried to fly after her, but the Titan's death throes hurled him to the ground. He hit hard, the cosmic energy flickering unstable within him. Polaris steadied him once more, but the connection was weakening. The Titan screamed one final time, collapsing inward until nothing remained but a plume of burning starlight that dissipated into the wind. Silence fell across Antarctica. Arctic staggered to his feet, gasping, searching desperately for Bertha. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. Then, through the haze, he saw movement. A small shape trudging across the broken ice field, smoking slightly, fur singed, eyes narrowed in profound irritation. Bertha was alive. She walked up to Arctic, bit him on the boot for worrying her, and then collapsed on his foot with a grunt of exhausted triumph. Arctic laughed once, weakly, and dropped to one knee beside her. Vrax approached slowly with his surviving soldiers, awe etched across every face. They looked not at Arctic as a man but as a living legend who had burned a cosmic nightmare out of the sky. Polaris' presence inside Arctic dimmed. You have done enough. Release me. He felt the cosmic warmth flowing out of him, withdrawing like a tide. The starlight seeped from his skin, leaving him human once more. His body sagged with exhaustion. Polaris' form reappeared beside him, regaining its shape in soft, shimmering light. Arctic asked what happened next. Polaris answered not with words, but a gentle impression of gratitude. Then it rose upward, drifting toward the sky like a rising sun. The clouds parted for it. The air sang around it. And then it was gone, returning to whatever cosmic path awaited it. Earth was safe. The Empire withdrew in stunned silence, agreeing to a peace brokered by a man who only wanted a quiet life and a honey badger who wanted snacks. Vrax saluted Arctic with genuine respect, though he flinched every time Bertha looked at him. Arctic and Bertha returned to Alaska in a small shuttle, their boots covered in snow, their clothes scorched, their minds